Good afternoon. Welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. My name is Rich Krepich, Senior Director of Outreach and Education at the Cleveland Council on World Affairs and a longtime member of the City Club of Cleveland. I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker, Stan Heffner. Stan has been with the Ohio Department of Education since 2004 when he was named the Associate Superintendent for Curriculum and Assessment. He was then named Ohio's 36th State Superintendent of Public Instruction on July 12, 2011. Prior to his time at the state level, Stan was the superintendent of the Madison Local School District in Lake County. There has been much activity in the 6 months since Mr. Heffner has taken over at the state, and there are plans to raise the bar in Ohio for education. Starting in 2014, there will be changes in the learning standards for English, math, science, and social studies. In every grade, starting with third grade, tests will be given via computer instead of with pen and paper. Mr. Heffner wants to incorporate more hands-on activities in the classroom and bring the No Child Left Behind Act up to speed. He and Jim Petro, Chancellor of the Ohio Board of Regents, are developing a partnership to work towards the goal of having all high school graduates academically prepared to attend college. The two offices are working on a plan to test all 10th graders in public schools this fall to assess their readiness for college and careers and determine if the student is on track to graduate. All of this is to get Ohio's public schools to meet new, higher standards. Stan recently was quoted as saying, "If we don't step up, we're going to deny our kids." He is preparing the state's public schools to prepare students for jobs that aren't even created yet. So at this time, please join me in welcoming my good friend, Stan Heffner, Ohio State Superintendent of Public Instruction, to the City Club podium.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Rich, and good afternoon, everyone. This is really an honor for me to be with you today. You know, for many years when I was superintendent of the Madison Local School District in Lake County, I never imagined that one day that I might be standing here before you at the City Club, which has hosted, as we discovered, so many incredible prominent speakers over the past 100 years. And I'm particularly proud to be here with you during your centennial celebration. I really want to congratulate all of the outstanding people who've made this forum possible for the past 100 years. I'm about to lower your standards. I really want to begin my remarks today with one very simple premise. I want all kids in Ohio to succeed, period. Now, in order to assure that they are, and they're able to do that, I want to talk to you today about some very profound changes that are happening in Ohio's public education system, as Rich alluded to, and even some of the bigger changes that are coming very soon. I also ask for your help. For those of you who have children in school, the importance of better schools is really obvious. But everyone has a stake in our kids' success because they are going to be the future of our community and our state. So, how's that current system of education working for them? Well, while major reform is in the works, the good news is that we're building on a strong foundation both at the policy level and in the classroom. Certainly, we are proud of the fact that 352 out of 614 public school districts in Ohio were rated this year as excellent or above on the state report cards that were issued. Add to that Education Week, which is a national publication that ranks states' educational systems through its annual Quality Counts Index, just moved Ohio from 11th to 10th place in the nation for overall quality. And recently, we completed the first year of our federal Race to the Top grant program, which is a game-changing federal policy program that is aimed at touching all levels of education with reforms. Ohio, in fact, was complimented by the U.S. Department of Education last week. Ohio and Massachusetts were the number 1 and number 2 states in the nation on the reforms there for the progress that we're making. And our state just won a second federal Race to the Top grant, this one for early childhood education. So indeed, we can be proud of these accomplishments. But we also cannot rest on our laurels. Instead, we have to assure that our schools are serving our children for a lifetime they will have, which is going to be substantially different from the lifetimes that we have enjoyed. And for that reason, I would like to challenge Ohio's education system even further so it can rise to the challenges that we know our children are going to face. For that reason, I would encourage all of you here today to view education systems differently from what you know. Because the successes that I just mentioned are based on minimums. So what do I mean by minimums? These successes are based on a system that was designed in the 1980s to measure whether or not students had at least an 8th, 9th, or 10th grade level of basic education in the core subject areas of English and mathematics. They are not the skills that prepare students to be accepted to college today without the need to take remedial coursework. And they certainly are not the level of preparation for skills that students need to get a decent job in this new workplace, to earn a living wage, or to maintain a quality standard of living. In fact, the current system of minimum standards was really intended to create a learning safety net that Ohio put up decades ago, when business leaders were concerned that too many students at that time were getting diplomas without demonstrating even the basic skills in mathematics and reading. It was a good idea 20-some years ago. After a while, everybody forgot where we had set the bar, which was quite low. And we forgot, during that interim period, to challenge our kids. We created a system where students could pass school, but not necessarily be ready to go to college or to get a good paying job. In the current system, students take the Ohio graduation test in the spring of their sophomore year. Typically, 2 out of 3 students pass all 5 parts of that test the very first time they take it. But the number of right answers that are needed on the graduation test, and quite frankly on the Ohio achievement assessments given at the lower grades, is shockingly low. On average, students only need to pass 37% of the items to be successful on the test or be considered proficient. And that hasn't changed since the system was first created. Now, what does this all say to a 15-year-old in 10th grade who does pass all 5 parts of the test first time? Basically, what we're telling those kids is that they're finished because they just passed a test of high school skills. So with that in mind, many of these students think, well, I'll just finish my remaining coursework, try to get as much of it done by the end of my junior year, so that by the time I'm a senior, I can take the fewest classes possible. Hopefully I can get early dismissal because I can get a part-time job and make some money during my senior year, and also because I've earned the right not to have to study because I'm a senior. Because they've already passed a test that told them that they have met the high school standards, even though those standards are for the 8th, 9th, and 10th grade levels at best. Now, some of you parents out here, I think, might know what I'm talking about. It's very difficult for a student to go to college and immediately dive back into high-level mathematics if that student has taken a year or 2 off from ever using that intellectual muscle. And do the kids who score at the top end of our tests, are they faring even any better? Well, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP, is the nation's report card. NAEP is a test that's given to a representative sample of students all across the United States, and it measures performance at a level that is pretty much close to a college and career-ready set of standards for kids, either to get into college or actually have the same skill levels to get good-paying jobs. Well, according to recent research, 4th grade reading, 43% of the kids who took the Ohio test this year in 4th grade reading were found to have scored at advanced or accelerated levels. When we took that same test and we scaled it to NAEP, only 9% met that advanced level. Another example, 8th grade reading. Last year, 52%, over half, of Ohio students scored at accelerated or advanced levels on that reading test. When we converted it to the NAEP standard, it was 3%. So, in short, we have become excellent at being mediocre. And we are at best mediocre at being excellent. Now, I'm not blaming the schools for this, and I'm not blaming the teachers, I'm not blaming administrators, I'm not blaming the students. All of them are playing by the rules that other people set for them a long time ago. This is a state system design problem, and I want to fix it. No organization can stay in the mediocre middle and expect to survive. Our world is just simply changing much too fast. So, for example, if you recall the early days of the cell phones, some of you, the very first years, when I think of the early cell phones, I think of some of the early ones, they're about the size of walkie-talkies. Today, they'd make great doorstops. Oh, and by the way, have you ever asked a high school student, have you ever said walkie-talkie to a high school student? They'll look at you like you're crazy. Because phones evolved in a very short period of time. Phones evolved. They both got smaller and more powerful. So that today, we have 4G smartphones that can access the internet, play movies, download any kind of data sets, and do all sorts of remarkable things. There are over 16,000 applications that are now available on these phones for download. So the evolution of the cell phone is a perfect example of the speed of change that goes on in everyday life, except in school. Because our expectations for student learning did not keep pace during this evolutionary period. And it's also true that the world in which our students live is dramatically different than the world they inherit when they're in school. So after school, for example, they go home, they text, they Facebook, they YouTube, they tweet. In school, these powerful tools are often just not available to them, or if they are, rarely used. So generally speaking, what we have at night is kids who go home and live in a high-tech bedroom, and during the day come and live in a low-tech classroom. This is a huge disconnect. Our students need classrooms that reflect the real world. John Dewey, the father of modern education, told us all about this in the 1920s. I think in 2012 it's time we listened. Because when we look at the job market, there have been huge changes as well. Think about previous recessions in this country and how we've bounced back. The jobs that people lost in the early 1990s were not the jobs that they got back later that decade. Those jobs that they got back were largely a result of the boom of the internet and technology-based enterprises. They were different jobs. They were new jobs for then the new economy. Now we find ourselves climbing out of one of the worst recessions in our nation's history. The 600,000 jobs that were lost in Ohio over the past 10 years are not coming back. Certainly not the way they were. Things may be slowly healing in the economy, but we are also starting to see that this recovery is based largely on global forces. So that the skill sets that our students need now, they're going to get and keep the good jobs, are the skills that cannot be automated, cannot be outsourced, cannot be digitized. This means that the skills that we're teaching in our minimum standard school system are nowhere near adequate to allow for the next generation to compete and win. We have to prepare our students today for jobs that don't even yet exist. So think back when Bill Clinton was elected president, as an instance. Back then, there wasn't Google. In fact, it would be 3 more years before Larry Page and Sergey Brin would meet at Stanford University at a student orientation and create this concept. Today, Google is a verb as well as a noun, and it's also a Fortune 100 company. In 1973, only about a quarter of the jobs in Ohio required a college education. In 2018, not that long away, it's projected that 2/3 of the jobs in the state are going to require some form of post-secondary education after high school, although it doesn't necessarily have to be in a traditional 4-year program. So if our students want to go to college, we want to assure that they arrive there prepared and that they don't have to retake high school courses they should have gotten the rigor in the first place in order to get caught up. If they enter the workforce, we need to make sure they have the skills to land the job that they choose, to be able to keep that job, and to advance in their chosen field. We also want them to compete and win against anyone, anytime, and anywhere in the world. So to do this, we cannot see a high school diploma as the last stop. Instead, it needs to be seen as an admissions ticket to the next step. One of the reasons is simply that all the aspects of modern living require us to think more. So take reading comprehension, for example. Did you know the reading comprehension level needed to do the important daily things like read a will, a mortgage, or an insurance plan actually requires a reading comprehension level more difficult than the standard for admissions on the ACT or the SAT? Reading comprehension is tremendously important, regardless of whether a student who graduates from high school chooses to go to college, enter the workforce, or serve our country in the military. Enhanced reading comprehension is just a start for students to be employable. They also need other skills. So, for instance, you cannot outsource creativity. You cannot digitize innovation, and you surely cannot automate collaboration. We need to teach more students to master these skills and live by them alongside the mastery of the subject matter that is so important for their educations. All right, so what is Ohio doing to meet these challenges? Well, first, as Rich said, by the 2014-2015 school year, there will be new learning standards in Ohio. Last year, Ohio became the 7th of 44 states to adopt the Common Core State Standards for English and Mathematics, a common set of higher rigor and college preparatory standards. Ohio also updated its standards in science and social studies much along the same lines. These standards, taken together, provide a consistent and clear understanding of what students are going to be expected to learn in each grade level, so that their parents and their teachers will continuously know what they need to do to help their children along the way. The standards are designed to be robust and relevant in a real world, culminating with the knowledge and skills that our young people are going to need to have a meaningful diploma when they graduate, and a real chance for success in their choice of either colleges or careers. All right, second, through a change in classroom practice and school culture, easily said, hard to do, but there will be a greater emphasis on problem solving, project-based learning, and student presentations that promote reasoning and give our students real opportunities to show what they know and not have to wait for the annual state test to do it. Third, we'll measure these higher expectations for learning with a completely new system of online tests that are going to provide opportunities that are not available with just current paper and pencil tests. For example, through online testing and the resulting real-time feedback students will receive, classroom instruction can now become much more personalized. These tests will use data to inform classroom practices, test students' higher-level critical thinking skills, and unleash the power of technology so that students use the power of technology that our students use today for their social and entertainment purposes, and have that power be turned into a motivation for their learning. It'll be possible for assessments to be administered on electronic devices other than a PC, and some of these may not have even yet been invented. The tests will yield real-time feedback on student performance and actually inform the next steps of instructional decision-making, which are the real purposes about why tests exist. So we're going to actually get a system that's going to give us better results and do it in quicker time at lower cost. Since our kids are being prepared in a system that right now only asks the minimum, what might we expect, though, when these new tests come online? Simply put, I believe the passage rates are going to be initially quite lower. In the beginning, we should expect that all report card rankings that are issued to Ohio schools are going to decrease because it's new and folks need opportunities to make adjustments. Because when we adjust our current scores, our current pass rates, those districts in excellent, for example, when we adjust those current scores to other tests, such as the NAEP, that use college and career-ready levels as their standards, we're projecting Ohio's passage rates will drop somewhere between the current 70 and 80% to 30 and 40%, at least in the first couple of years. But let me tell you why that's okay. And let me give you some historical context that proves that our kids can and will rise to meet these new challenges and excel. Back when Ohio first started proficiency testing, and this is back in the early 90s, There was also a very low passage rate in school districts for those very first years until faculty and schools got a better feel for what that system was all about, and students had more opportunity to work with it. In fact, the first year of the Ohio graduation tests, when those were given, 2 out of 3 students failed the reading, 3 out of 4 kids failed the math. Parents and educators were horrified. Oh no, the standards are too high, they said. The bar is too much. So the performance expectations for the test in the subsequent year were actually lowered, so more kids could pass the bar. My colleagues who've been around understand that. Over time, though, their schools rose to the levels that we now see. So we know that people will rise to the occasion. Now, Massachusetts had a similar outcome in the first year of their state tests. But different from Ohio, that state did not lower its expectations. It said this is what kids need to know and be able to do to be successful, get with the program. So as a result, because Massachusetts didn't back down, they lead the nation today in NAEP scores. And they are highly competitive on all the international measures. So even though the results will probably be bad at first, there will probably be more benefits of learning at higher levels with this new system in place. Students and teachers will get used to the increased rigors of the curriculum and the use of the online testing. They will rise to those higher expectations just as students in other states and in the countries of our international competitors have done. So we're changing what is taught, and we're going to change what is tested. We also must teach or change how we teach. So think back, if you will, in the days of high school. For some of you, that's longer than others. My guess is you can remember more about what you researched when you had to do that term paper for class than any of the contents of your favorite lecture. More people learn and gain a deeper understanding of material when they're personally engaged in it. In order to accomplish this, that means then our classrooms must operate differently. They cannot be composed of rows of hard plastic chairs that students sit in all day and hear and are talked to. Teachers can no longer be the dispensers of knowledge. They have to be the facilitators of knowledge. Our great educators today actually understand this. Likewise, our students need to be pursuers of knowledge, not the receptacles. And in many ways, students who are engaged in our career technical programs that have hands-on learning experiences have proven the success of this methodology. On many fronts, we're making training in these new approaches to teaching and learning available to Ohio's educators. It's important they have opportunities to take advantage. We also need to make it much easier for them to use data in deciding how to teach kids with different learning needs. That's one of the failings of the current state testing system. By the time the results are back, some 60 days after they take the test, it's often too late to make any meaningful use of them. So under our federal Race to the Top grant, we are building a very powerful information system that will use the technology to give teachers real-time information about their academic performance of every student in their class and links to proven teaching methods that can address the specific learning needs of each child. Now, this new world is going to be a challenge for educators because we are asking an awful lot from them. That's why we're also working to give our schools some very much needed freedom from burdensome federal regulations. The federal No Child Left Behind law was passed in 2001. And we know of its many flaws, but it has never been reauthorized, it has never been improved, and nothing has changed in that federal law. Now, Secretary of Education Arne Duncan has asked the states to request waivers from the law since Congress fails to act. These waivers will reflect the most innovative thinking in the states. They will build on our experience and they will modernize our system. Ohio, on February 21st, will request a federal waiver that is based on this very simple principle. We will step up and accept higher levels of rigor for our kids in our schools, and in return, we are asking you for less flexibility, for less regulation and more flexibility to do the job. I was starting to think like a Washington bureaucrat for a moment. In short, hold us accountable for results, but don't dictate to us how to get the job done. Let us do it the way our communities need to have it done. We're also asking the federal government to give our schools more flexibility in the way that federal dollars are spent. And finally, if waivers are good enough at the federal level, they ought to be welcomed at the state level too. Ladies and gentlemen, I am in the waiver business. Especially in these difficult economic times, I will welcome waiver requests that school districts want to submit that outline how they can serve their kids better, spend their tax dollars more wisely, and get higher results without burdensome state regulations getting in their way. So any school district wishing to propose reform plans that improve academic performance will find a warm reception from me. It is also crucial that we have ways to stretch the education dollars further and put more dollars into the classroom. Right now, about 85% of a typical school district's budget goes into personnel costs. That includes salaries plus fringe benefits, which doesn't leave then much more money left over for districts to use in meeting all of their other costs. That's why we're providing incentives for schools, cities, and townships to share services and cut their mutual overhead costs. Now, we already see this form of collaboration among school districts that have formed cooperatives in the purchasing of buses and supplies, insurance plans, and so on and so forth. But the pooling of these services need to expand beyond just schools working together to all local levels of government. So, for example, how many payroll systems does Cuyahoga County need for the county, the school, the city, the townships, and everybody else to process paychecks? How much duplication and waste do we have to endure? We know there are better ways to get more out of tax dollars through the sharing of the costs of the overhead. So why would we not want to stop duplicating these administrative costs and reinvest those savings back into classroom needs? Now, why am I telling you all this? And what do you want to do about it? I'd like to ask you to think about 3 ideas. First, make sure that in the business community here that you're involved in an active school district business advisory council. Now, this helps to ensure that districts are using sound business principles in their operations, they're spending their limited funds wisely, and they're engaging in learning systems that produce students who have the knowledge and skills that will reflect the community's needs, and to do this for all of our kids. State law requires business advisory councils to be present in every school district. Been on the books for 20 years, but many are not functioning. So I would ask my district about getting involved in the council or reviving it if the council has gone dormant. Second, I hope all of you will support implementing the higher learning and performance standards that are coming for our schools. As I mentioned earlier, this will likely mean the district's not going to look as good as it does now for the first few years of the implementation. And it's important that you tell others this because Ohio is asking more from their students. But in a short time, our students will rally and they will deliver. Third, knowing that we have a significant number of changes coming ahead in 2014-2015 school year, I would ask local leaders to go to the school board at each of the meetings and simply say, what is your transition plan between what today's minimum standard system looks like in your district to what it needs to look like in 2014-2015? What are you doing to prepare the students to get those good jobs or to pursue their educations with the new standards coming on board? What are your benchmarks along that way between now and 2014, 2015? And what still needs to get done? Are we on track or are we not on track? Are you beginning every local school board meeting with reports to the community about the progress that are being made on that transition plan? Are you focused more on these issues that are so critical to our future, or are you distracted by the small things that in the long run don't matter and miss the big mark? We need to show our families that their child's education has meaning behind it. We need to make schools prove that the diplomas that they issue equate to the skills that match the college or job requirements that the students will be asked to face. Families need to encourage their children to take the ACT, to take the SAT, and ensure that their goals of getting prepared for a job or college are on track. And most importantly, never let me or any bureaucrat ever tell you that your son or daughter can't do better, even much better, because that limits them and it cheats them from living their dreams. Now, I know we're asking an awful lot from our schools right now during these tough economic times. But we can't wait for the economy to get better to do right by our kids. Otherwise, they're going to continue to fall further behind, and our future becomes dimmer. There's a common saying in education that all children can learn. Well, we have to stop saying that. We need to start acting on it, and we have to act to make sure that all students will learn. And we have evidence that students can learn through our Ohio Schools of Promise program. Now, Ohio Schools of Promise are shining examples of schools that defy all the odds. Their students come from disadvantaged backgrounds. They come from high poverty and all the other kinds of places that people make excuses for why they can't learn. These kids are supposed to fail, but these schools take every step necessary to ensure that their students not only learn, but they actually excel. And that's because these schools do not settle for labeling children. Instead, they serve children. And they don't accept excuses for why kids aren't achieving. They just persist until the students do achieve. These schools exist all throughout Ohio, and 3 of them, all high schools, are right here in Cleveland. So we have Design Lab at Jane Addams, we have John Hay Early College High School, and we have the John Hay School of Science and Medicine. So their story needs to be told more often than what goes wrong with the public schools, and it needs to be lived every day. Their successes should be studied, and there's no reason, if it can work in those schools, those kinds of principles and the activities they engage in ought to be transported to all of the schools and lift all of Cleveland and all of Ohio. We have to challenge our students to reach these heights that they never thought that they could reach, because evidence shows that when we do, they will. This also means we need to challenge ourselves. It's time that we let go of the comfort of a school bureaucracy that rewards routines over the challenges of going for higher results. Educators are going to need to work very hard to change their current practice, and administrators have got a whole lot to do to manage all of this with no money in tight economic times. They need your encouragement and they need your support. For their work will be hard. But I know that we can do it. I know that we must do it, and I know, therefore, that we will do it. The outcomes will be worth it. And it is in the daily doing of this work that I hope we can all be as inspired as I am by the words of the late Ron Edmonds, who was a founder of the Effective Schools movement, who asked us, we already know everything we need to know to make sure that we can make an important difference in the lives of all of our children, and to have them attain high levels of learning. The only question now that remains before us is how we feel about the fact that we haven't so far. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Stan. Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are listening to a special program featuring Stan Heffner, State Superintendent of Public Instruction in Ohio. We will return momentarily for our traditional City Club questions. We encourage you to formulate questions for our speaker now and remind you that your questions should be brief and to the point. We welcome all of you here, especially those who are guests. We hope you will join the City Club and become active in our ongoing civic dialogue. In 2012, the City Club of Cleveland will turn 100 years old. There are a number of events planned. To learn more about the 100th anniversary events, visit the City Club website, www.cityclub.org/100. We welcome all of you here and those listening to WCPN 90.3 FM, WCLV, WTAM, or one of the many radio stations across the country. Our television broadcast partner is WVIZ PBS IdeaStream. Television broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Our live webcast is supported by the University of Akron. Tomorrow, Friday, January 27th, the City Club welcomes Karen Mills, Administrator of the Small Business Administration. Next Tuesday, January 31st, the City Club hosts a panel discussion on exotic animal legislation in Ohio as a result of the tragedy in Zanesville in the fall. Wednesday, February 1st, the City Club is pleased to present the second State of the County address with County Executive Ed Fitzgerald. If you wish to make reservations or order a CD or DVD of today's program, please call 1-888-223-6786 or 216-621-0082. We are pleased to welcome guests at tables hosted by City Year, Cuyahoga County Community College, Hudson City Schools, and Pipeline Development Company. Thank you for your support. Today is also the Bernice Kerrigan Smith Forum on Education, made possible by a generous gift from the Pipeline Development Company. Joining us today is Ed Smith and members of the Smith family, and will you please stand to be recognized? Now we would like to return to our speaker for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding the microphone today is City Club Program Director Carrie Miller. Now, our first question, please.
Okay. Good afternoon. As we move towards a teaching education system focused on problem solving and project-based learning and et cetera, what impact do you think that will have on teacher education programs in higher ed?
Thank you. First of all, as I understand, the questions are to be brief. You said nothing about the answers. So that's good. But to your point, which I think is very insightful, the system I described transcends the traditional K-12 setting. So we have a number of things that need to change in classroom practice. And so that talks to two audiences. One is the current educators who are going to need to make the adjustments. But the other one is the institutions that are preparing new teachers to come into the classroom. Too many times, I think it's fair game to say that people who engage in teaching use practices of teachers that were favorites of theirs or things that work for them. And that might be well and good for them, but it may not necessarily address the needs of all of their children. So it is really critical that higher education become much more involved in the Common Core standards. And they were at the table when they were drafted. They are going to be at the table when the new tests are brought online. But we also need to have the teacher education institutions really right there to understand that there will be a tremendous change in the dynamics in the classroom practices, and they really need to understand it themselves, because you cannot prepare teachers for things you do not understand yourself.
Yes, Stan. Roger Gowdy, Superintendent of Madison Local, where you sat for 15 years, so you can empathize with that.
I appreciate your cleaning up the mess, Roger.
My question has more to do with what a friend's concern that teaches in a career center. And he posed the question to me, and if I said I've ever had the opportunity to talk with you, I'd ask the question. And that question leads right into what you talked about, not only college readiness, but career readiness.
Right.
And a concern of, I guess, of a lot of his colleagues in the business of career education is that the time they have to spend on task with the skills over the years has shrunk to a point where they can't teach the trades anymore. And I don't know what your plan is or your vision is for the career centers, but is there going to be something done to allow these teachers that are well-intentioned, that really want to develop these kids? As we all know, not every child has to go to college. And in this case, they develop kids in skills that are much needed. Right. What are your plans in that area?
Well, two thoughts come to mind right away. Well, actually, let me start with the third one, which is that career technical education, quite frankly, has led the way in the United States in school reform over the last 15 years. And we would be a lot smarter if we take a look at what they're doing in career technical schools and apply those to traditional settings. So that's one. The other 2 points I want to make is, one, career technical schools, for as good as they are, I never understood, if all of you remember, you had like in high school, you had maybe a 7-period day or an 8-period day, and everything started at a certain time, everything ended at a certain time, as though kids all learned exactly at the same starting point, they all went the exact same speed, and they were all done at a certain point. When in fact, there may be days when, wouldn't it be amazing if we actually stopped using the clock as the excuse and let kids really get involved in these kinds of projects, and if we're smarter about how we plan the use of our time and get off this whole Carnegie unit nonsense, that we'd be a lot better off. So one would be just to start adjusting how we use the time. The second one is that one of the things that tends to get in the way of traditional or the really good reform career technical programs, and they're kind of traditional because they've been doing it so long, is there are traditional classes where kids have to learn math, they have to learn English, they have to learn some other skills. We're engaged in a project that we'll be announcing next year. I think we're going to have our pilots finished. that is going to allow for the dual award of academic credit and program credit in career technical programs. So, for example, does anybody believe that there's any chemistry in cosmetology? There's a ton of it. There is a lot of mathematics that is done in automotive. So why are we reteaching the skills? If we can co-teach the skills and put them in a context of their kids' program, we can do it with more effective use of time, allow for greater concentration, and make the courses more relevant for the kids. So that's where we're headed out of the state, and you'll be seeing that probably in the next month or about another half a year or so.
I would suggest that both of you come to Max Hayes High School on the west side of Cleveland, where that's already taking place, what you've just described.
Excellent.
It's called the Team Academy. Stands for Technology, Technology, Engineering, and Advanced Manufacturing. It has the business community engaged. It has the school district engaged, and it's a fabulous program. My question for you, sir, is you mentioned something about information systems.
Yes.
And my experience with EMIS was pretty awful, to be perfectly honest with you. And you know, the A sites and education service centers, I mean, the whole thing used to be a horrible mess, and maybe it's been cleaned up. But you know, if you don't have a functioning education management information system, you're not going to be able to do what you just described.
That's right.
Can you explain a little bit more about what you're doing to make sure that works properly?
Sure. Under the federal Race to the Top grant that we received, we have funds to develop a successor to this current educational management information system. So this is kind of like you know, some old wind-up kind of toy, right? You know, it's just it's really an outdated system. The problem was when the state had in the early days when the state first put this together, they just never put the dollars forward to create a cohesive system. So statewide, there were all kind of vendors, and everybody kind of did their own thing, but you had systems that didn't talk to each other. So over time, this EMIS system that has been referred to has tried to put a patch here and a plug there, and they've just tried to make things tend to work. Finally, under this Federal Race to the Top grant, we have the chance to start over. So what we're going to do is we're building a system that will allow all of the current systems to actually interact with it. There are things called SIF standards that's going to allow for interoperability of the systems, and it will come together with a cohesive design and architecture for both management purposes and instructional purposes. And then finally, the best part about this is it's not being designed by the Department of Education. It's being designed by the people who need to use the system. We actually grew a brain and listened to our customers. So as we look at what they need to use the information for and when they need to know it, now we know how to put the designs together to meet customer needs. So when the system comes online, probably within 2 years' time, I think you're going to see a dramatically improved information system and one that's long overdue.
Hi, good afternoon. It seems like a lot of the innovations and ideas you described have already been mastered by charter schools. What would you, in your opinion, what would you say are the big pros and cons of charter schools in particular?
Well, there are good charter schools and there are bad charter schools. And I quite frankly think there are good public schools and I think there are bad public schools. So the question in my mind is I believe that all Ohio parents ought to have choice. But the choices that are made available to them need to have quality and integrity behind them. Charter schools exist to do things that right now the current regulations in the public schools prohibit. So that's why they're experimental. They're given an opportunity to try different things. Some experiments work better than others, quite frankly. Some people were really well-intended, didn't have a clue what they were doing. Kids suffered as a result. Other places had great success. In some places, public school districts created their own what we call conversion schools. They created their own form of a community school. So the question is to go out and look at those community schools that are doing particularly well and observe what those are, what are the things that they have in common, and then communicate that to the sponsors of these community schools as basically effective practices. Then start holding the sponsors far more accountable for the oversight, not only just financially, but also for academic rewards. So, for example, if under our House Bill 153, those charter schools now that are in the bottom 20% of the ranking of all charter schools, 3 consecutive years, we shut them down. So we want to, at the one time, we don't want to be hostile toward community schools because we believe that they're working from innovative practices that everybody could benefit from. But likewise, we need to have a check on the quality. And regardless of whether it's a community school or a traditional school, when things work, we need to collect that information, communicate it to others, and really help them to apply those principles so all kids benefit. That was supposed to be the idea behind charters.
So my question is about school funding. Given the significant cuts that have happened this biennial budget with HB 153 and the apparent unwillingness to consider new revenue to strengthen schools and other areas of the state, what's your thought about what's going to happen with the funding formula and particularly around equity issues that have dogged the state for so long?
Well, this is going to sound like a weasel answer. Under House Bill 153, the legislature has charged the governor with the responsibility of putting the plan together. We are supplying a lot of technical information, but I think the governor has already indicated this plan is going to be a while yet in coming. And so I don't anticipate seeing anything in this biennium, but he'll have probably something for the next biennium. But until that time, they are taking the point on the design process.
My question is really about vision and competition. If I heard you correctly, the NAEP scores, congratulations, we've gone from 11th to 10. That's good news. And then I guess being an Indians fan, and I don't like to lose to the Red Sox, I hear we're losing to Massachusetts, who's #1. So from a vision perspective, what does it look like for Ohio to become the best in the nation in that score? And what do you think are the key criteria that would get us there in an accelerated manner?
Well, thank you. In many ways, what I had laid out in my remarks, I think, are necessary. A couple of key things. Number one is that we need to stop thinking about putting institutional needs first. They need to be kids' needs first. Secondly, we need to look at the power of the technologies that kids are using every day for social entertainment purposes and start focusing more on the applications of those things where they're actually much more engaged in the doing of things. When I talk about project-based learning, I don't want cutesy things where the kids go, create their favorite candy bar. I want to have things where people go to the content standards and they bundle them. And then there's a large question, or like a real-life problem kind of a thing, where the kids then need to identify what is it that I need to know in order to begin to address this question or solve the problem. And how do I utilize the internet and other forms of technology to help me pursue those data that I might need in order to articulate a sound and reasoned argument. So if I can problem solve, if I can sequence events, if I can demonstrate logic, if I can communicate in a clear and concise and coherent manner, and I can do this in both written and oral form, I have just met the requirements for most employers and most colleges for success. So we're going to be focusing particularly in literature, in English, we're going to be focusing on literary text and reading comprehension skills from that literary text. Much of it's going to be nonfiction. Because believe it or not, when the kids get out of school, they do know they need to tell you a set of directions. They need to be able to follow instructions. They need to understand manuals. So you're going to see a greater focus in that direction in mathematics. Kids are going to have to know their basic math facts, but they also have to know the concepts behind them. It's more than one thing to say when you divide fractions, you invert and multiply. It's another to know why. So we're going to be focusing on fewer things, but we're going to go much more in depth. And when we do that, we know that the other kind of learnings then that students need essentially attach on, because once the core values are there and the core knowledge is in place, it's much faster and easier for other kinds of things to come. But if you don't get it in the first place, the rest of it is just kind of static. If that makes sense.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Hello. Sonia Pryor-Jones. My question for you has to do with your comment you made about us needing to view education differently. I agree with that, but we know what's core to that is leadership. And I'm particularly interested in your thoughts about leadership on the ground at the district level. On the east side of Cleveland right now, we are losing 3 area superintendents, and we're going to need to, as communities, go out, search for, and hire new superintendents. Can you talk a little bit about the characteristics of a new superintendent for the kinds of ideas that you propose for Ohio and its kids in the future?
Well, thank you. A couple notions come to mind. First, we need to stop thinking about school as a place and start thinking of it as a process. Or better put another way, think of school as a verb, not a noun. It changes the conversation. It doesn't mean that everybody has to come to a particular spot. So leaders need to be thinking about, if the focus is more on learning than on teaching, and the idea of that schooling could be available 24/7 in any place and can be done as often as necessary through applications of technology, for example, it changes the whole dynamic about how many kids are being disaffected and going to community schools, how many kids are being homeschooled, how many other kids don't tend to fit the traditional mold. And then because if they don't fit the mold, there's a possibility the ones who are staying behind aren't getting as much out of it as they need to as well. So one would be to have them thinking about and articulating better the idea that learning is not confined to an 8 to 3 day in a particular building. That's one. Second thing is that inside the larger districts in particular, I really believe if you look at the effective schools research, the work of Larry Lizotte and, of course, my good friend, the late Ron Edmonds, and Wilbur Brookover, there were 5 basic correlates of effective schools. They had strong instructional leadership. They had frequent monitoring of progress that was used to inform instruction. They had set a warm, inviting, and yet challenging school climate. They had excellent family relationships. So along those lines, but of all of those, the key one was the strong instructional leadership by building principals. One of the things that I am dismayed about, and I don't mean to upset anybody, but let me just be honest about it. If the research says when building principals can have control of their schools and they can set the tone and the climate and they are the nurturers and we hold them accountable for the results, I get annoyed when I see central office dictates that tell them what they got to teach, when they got to teach it, how fast they got to teach it, and who's going to be in their building. And I'm bothered by labor contracts that put the staff desires over the kids' needs, so that if you've got things that need to happen in a school and that principal needs to make them happen, it's very difficult to hold a principal accountable for things when the principal's hands are tied. So that bothers me a lot. It's one of the great things about community schools. You don't tend to have quite as much of this. The only problem is many community schools, in my opinion, haven't quite figured out how to work the dynamics. But another trait of those superintendents then is to change the relationship between the central office and each of the schools. Just like on the waiver, greater flexibility in return for higher standards of accountability, but let them do the job. So I think that's a huge part of it. And then finally, a third one would be, with every school board, I really believe that many school board members will come to a meeting reflecting the community to the superintendent, which I think is a smart thing. Hopefully, school boards are also thinking, and I know our State Board of Education, Mary Rose Okar, is here. We're talking about the other role of the board is to take the message about the need for schools back to the people. We don't have as much of the advocacy out there about the needs for education except for the levies. And that kind of bothers me an awful lot, too. So if you don't communicate what you're doing every day and showing your community why you're making progress, then their appreciation or lack thereof when it comes to levy time is kind of in a vacuum because they really don't know what's going on. So we have a responsibility to our public as well. Those are my 3 topics. Hello.
Hi, I'm with College Pathway Programs and TRIO Programs at Cuyahoga Community College. Last week, some of us attended the National Urban Education Conference at Central State University, and they talked extensively about the new Ohio academic standards and what we can do as college access professionals to support the initiative. And they talked a great deal about character and moral education, and that is what will create the culture of excellence, equity, and ethics in the school buildings where we do our work so that the standards can actually work. What is your comment to that?
Well, I couldn't agree more. I really couldn't. I think now we have Eric Gordon here, CEO of the Cleveland Municipal Schools. And Eric, I believe AVID programs are in your buildings, in some of them. Is that correct? So AVID programs do exactly what you've talked about. It is character building right along with mind building. There are too many kids who come from neighborhoods or from homes where there is zero support. Maybe dad doesn't even exist. Or there are too many men around, but none of them who are dads. Tough neighborhoods, different mores. So really effective folks understand the very first thing we need to do with those schools in those tough neighborhoods is that we have to first of all make them a safe haven. If children aren't safe, then under Maslow's hierarchy, their physical and safety needs aren't being met, nothing else matters. We'll get nowhere else. So the very first thing we do is we develop safe havens. Second thing we do is an outreach. We don't try to browbeat parents in those neighborhoods in attempt to use suburban middle-class values and tell them that they need to do these because otherwise they're going to be a bad parent, because that's not going to work. Instead, what we have to do is say, what is it we can do with your children while we have them in our schools? And by the way, if we can, we'll find ways to extend those school hours and give them extra help if that's something you would like. So that we can then, third, is teach them the translation skills so when they come out of the schools, they're still going to go back to an environment. And so they need to know how to do the coping. So that when they go back to that environment, there aren't people who are putting them down for trying to be too smart. They need to know how to do the coping. Once we have been able to do that, and we can capture their hearts, and only when we've done that can we think about capturing their minds. So it is about senses of self-dignity. It is about self-worth. One of those quotes I just commented, the positive school climate, that on the one hand says that while you're here, you know, we care about you, we're going to support you, but at the same time, no excuses. You're going to exceed because we care about you, and we're going to stick with it until you do. Once kids believe that you believe in them, they will do anything. So it is really critical that we involve ourselves in their self-worth, the relationships they have with others, and finally then the good positive role model relationships with adults that will facilitate their learning.
Ann Hammond, I'm a retired teacher. I was wondering if you could comment on the Finnish system where they eliminate tests till the very end, and then they really support the teachers and pay them like they would physicists or engineers or whatever, and pick from the top percent graduating for people that really love to teach and let the teachers teach whatever they want, how they want.
Excellent question. So I'm going to try and I'll give you the 1-minute primer about Finland. So here we go. In Finland, Finland used to have high-stakes tests until roughly right after World War II. At that time, they realized that whenever you, and here's the story, folks, and it's true in Ohio, the higher the bar, the higher the stakes on the testing, the lower the bar. If you have high-stakes tests, the only way you can get a reasonable number of kids over the bar is to make sure it's low enough that they can get over it. That's not college and career ready. So in Finland, what they've done is they got rid of their national high-stakes tests right around the end of World War II. They still have teacher-developed tests that are very sophisticated, and they generally are end of year, but they do have some midterm tests that teachers developed. But here's what about these teachers. These teachers, in America, you can apply, if you get into college and you want to go be a teacher, all you have to do is get admitted into college, and then you get into the education school, you take your courses, and then all of a sudden, and the theory has been that the colleges will just graduate these kids, and there'll be a whole lot of them in the marketplace. So when superintendents go to hire, they've got a nice selection. In Finland, they go the other direction. The top 3 to 5% of kids based on standardized admissions tests are the only ones that are even allowed in the education school. So when they basically save their best and their brightest because what they've discovered is education is the best economic weapon that they have. Because as President Obama said, the country that out-educates us is the country that out-competes us. So they have decided to put their investment there. So they take their best and their brightest. When they graduate and they get jobs, and most of them do, they average about twice as much in their base salary as teachers in other countries. However, the way that the Finns pay for this is that they have combined two classes. So the teachers in Finland may have a class size of over 50. They may have an aide assigned to them. They also do not have special education teachers. They teach all kids. Whereas we hire title teachers and special ed teachers and ESL teachers, they have Finnish as a second language. But these teachers basically take on these things with just the aides. In the end, economically, it's cheaper. Then they work the kids generally in groups and do the kind of project things that we're talking about. The tests that they're engaged in are tests that they have created as a conglomerate. So teachers across Finland come together and they make these exams. The exams then are used to measure the progress of the kids, both individually and collectively. But they do not go on a high-stakes report for the teacher. There is a conservative movement in Finland, however. They are thinking, the conservative movement right now is advocating for report cards for Finnish teachers. So what goes around comes around, I guess. There are things we can learn from the Finnish people. We're not Finlanders. It's not the same culture. But one of the things that I'm most impressed with is that when you lower the stakes, you can raise the bar, and then you can challenge kids more effectively.
Today at the City Club, we've been listening to a special program featuring Stan Heffner, State Superintendent of Public Instruction in Ohio. Thank you very much, Stan. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This program is now adjourned.